years before Tobe Hooper shocked the world with his morbidly grotesque slasher, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, now considered by many as one of the most disturbing American films ever made, the first truly naturalistic take on the underutilized and underappreciated subgenre of daytime horror was a British cult mystery with a long-standing reputation as being like the Citizen Kane of horror movies. Sure, a claim like that is usually internet hyperbole, but this film's storytelling was considerably different than anything that came before it, because instead of fantastical far-reaching concepts, the film gravitated towards something more relevant to the social milieus of the time, carrying with it the legacy of one single ominous statue and the eerily enigmatic title, The Wicker Man. So let's talk about it. While I'm of the opinion that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre became the quintessential example of how to make a daytime scary, it's impossible to overlook the prominence of the Wicker Man in helping to inspire a new wave of horror fiction where the scariest things don't just lurk in the shadows or behind the artifice of dramatic, spooky atmosphere. Before the 80s cultivated a trend towards explicit on-screen violence that somewhat softened and mildly appropriated certain aspects of 60s-70s shock culture, it's largely forgotten that the two decades in question were also a remarkable era in which filmmakers still find a way to grind even the most bizarre concepts into something genuinely conceivable without the necessity of violence. Prior to The Wicker Man, the only other proper daytime horror that was said to push sensibilities was Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds in 1963, but besides that movie not aging well at all despite having a reputation as one of the scarier and more violent films of its time, what was so impactful about the use of daytime as the setting for horror was that it removed the feeling of safety we typically associate with brightness. While it was technically harder to pull off scares, the complete emotional, psychological, and atmospheric departure from what we identify with fear meant successful attempts were able to place an instinctual discomfort into your ordinary everyday setting without some stylistic shift to signify impending doom. Instead, its USP was that there was no trigger warning. In theory, everything and anything could be hostile. The threat was invisible because it lurked right in front of you, penetrating the comfort zone we create around the things that scare us. The Wicker Man was actually an early example of that stupidly vapid question, is it really a horror movie? Because, for the most part, the film is pretty much a police procedural crime drama akin to British television and Agatha Christie novels, rather than something that conventionally resembled a horror movie. This was no surprise considering the book that the film is based on was authored by an actor who, at the time, played the leading role as Detective Sergeant Trotter in the West End adaptation of Agatha Christie's Mousetrap, and while writing the book, he implemented both elements of Christie's deductive style of storytelling and the occult nature of his previous work, a vampire comedy called Fanghorn. However, I obviously can't talk about the original Wicker Man without mentioning the 2006 comedy remake that leaned way too heavily on Nicolas Cageisms that, in comparison, makes it look like a children's pantomime where the director OD'd on bath salts. In fairness, the Americanized 2006 version is arguably its own partially original adaptation of the story, as it leaned more heavily on the supernatural elements of the book and went for bombastic jump scares and flashy imagery to force the illusion of a horror movie, given the source material wasn't, well, scary. It definitely jumped the shark in terms of subtlety, as if it was blindly panicking that modern audiences would check out when they realized that most people only remember The Wicker Man for its ending and nothing more, because if you truly have seen the original film, you'd definitely be questioning how this was considered disturbing for its time. So here's the thing, as pretentious as it's going to sound, The Wicker Man is like a horror movie that was manufactured exclusively in a lab for cinephiles, with a very acquired taste for those wanting to discuss the philosophies behind the story, than those who want to vividly gush over what the scariest scene in the movie was. Calling it boring and uneventful is fairly justified because, yeah, not really all that much happens in the film because everything that is happening is going on in the background, unbeknownst to the protagonist and audience. The story follows Police Sergeant Neil Howie as he travels to the fictional but clearly inspired island of Summerisle off the coast of Scotland to investigate the disappearance of a young girl after receiving an anonymous letter. From there, he encounters an eccentric village of pagan worshippers who tell Howie that the young girl never existed, to which he thinks the town are all in on a murder conspiracy, and from there, things just get progressively weirder in a very awkward sense. The film was produced with the intention of being as minimalistic as possible to capture a real sense of authenticity, where the reduction of elaborate scares and greater focus on character and world building would help make the sudden shocking pivot in the climax more believable. At the time, horror had to be considerably upfront with audiences because implanting horrific ideas into people's minds through implication or adverse stimuli was still a relatively new concept that established a gap between low and highbrow filmmaking that's now very commonplace amongst audiences who've seen everything at this point. Simply put, The Wicker Man is completely devoid of any actual scares. At most, it just very vaguely alludes to supernatural elements through the conviction of the villagers' beliefs. Instead, screenwriter Anthony Schaefer was very particular about making the mystery behind the creepy pagan cult the central focus of the movie. The problem, however, is that the very plot revelation that the horror rests on is ultimately spoiled through the marketing material and its one iconic pop culture legacy. The physical Wicker Man structure revealed in the final 10 minutes of the movie is designed to imprison a human to be sacrificially burnt alive to appease the god that the village worships to bring about a bountiful harvest next season since their current one has failed. The missing girl is thus assumed by Howie to be said sacrifice, but upon saving the girl, it's revealed that Howie was set up to be the prime sacrifice all along, to which, yes, he's burnt to death as the film ends, with the villagers happily celebrating the success of their ritual, with no indication of whether their superstitious beliefs hold any truth or not. But that ambiguity is entirely the point. What? To today's standards, that plot twist would be shrugged off with no surprise to anyone, but in the 70s, when conservative Christian values and devout commitment to faith and a traditionalist lifestyle were the absolute norm to society, at least to many, not necessarily everyone, given the rise of countercultures in the 60s and 70s, it was kinda edgelord to kill a Christian like that. Paganism is perceived as deviant to Howie, who spends most of the movie antagonistically throwing about his Christian beliefs that he fundamentally states are the unquestionable truth. In this respect, it actually makes him out to be the villain of the story. He's the strange outsider who brashly and condescendingly forces himself upon the town as the ultimate representation of power and authority, which the townsfolk believe has brought terror to their idyllic utopia. The thing is, I couldn't get past the fact that Howie is a bit of a bastard. What? Yes, his motive is clear, and his demand for respect is kinda necessary to uncover the case of the missing and soon presumed murdered child, but since his hostile demeanour clashes greatly with Christopher Lee, who wanted to play against his usual typecast with the calm and understanding Lord Summerisle, it makes it hard to sympathise with him. I assume the intention was to challenge Howie's judgment of the town as seemingly evil without any actual proof of his claim, at least until the final 10 minutes of the movie. Oh God! Oh Jesus Christ! The town might act weird and unconventional, but from everything we see, if welcomed with openness, does seem to suggest that the village is truly a positive sanctuary, away from the harsh, cruel outside world, corrupted by power, authority, conflict, and a belief system forced upon others as the absolute truth. It disillusions you to what you think is normal. I agree that it doesn't have the same effect today, given how standardized subversion, rebellion, and counterculture really is, yet, for its time, it made what should have been the villain seemingly understandable and, dare I say it, relatable. After all, they seek the happiness and freedom that the mainland cannot provide them, reinforced by Howie carrying this oppression onto the island, where it makes him somewhat of a symbolic monster to the story. The way I see his sacrifice coming about is because the village view him as the ultimate evil, and they believe that by sacrificing him, they might appease their angry god for doing what they perceive as a good deed. In the end, however, Howie does point out an obvious hypocrisy where these villagers are no different from him, in that they believe in sanctuary and salvation, yet they seem to worship a god that they fear. Put it this way, how is this a utopia when it's established on the foundation of not wanting to piss off a powerful entity that they cannot see or totally understand? The film isn't afraid to scrutinize other people's belief systems. Throughout the film, Howie is persistently driven to temptation to lust for other women, but manages to refuse all offers, committing wholly to his faith. As Lord Summerisle declares to Howie at the end before being sacrificed, he had the free will to do anything he wanted in his final days, but instead Howie chose to remain oppressed to systems that he believed in that were designed to control and maintain order at the expense of his own freedom. Really, The Wicker Man was a criticism to belief systems that society upheld. It pointed out a nervous truth to whatever morality we socially constructed. The film is taboo in its approach to a world that's lost its tranquility. In fact, it's not just the usual oppression themes, but the world is now, in many respects, like the village of Summerisle, maintained because of fear. Fear that we will just kill each other or return to the savagery we now see as wrong in our, again, socially constructed perception of what civilization ultimately is. The Wicker Man is not a horror movie I recommend for the common purposes of eliciting fear. It's more about an intimate philosophical journey of a man desperately trying to repress his natural human urges and live up to the expectations pressured on him by society. It's disturbing to see Howie become this unfortunate victim because it's truly not his fault that his upbringing reinforced such aggressive beliefs. But unlike every other horror movie, it flips the perspective onto Lord Summerisle, who might conventionally appear as the villain, but really, he's just another rebellion against the system, a return to a civilization when community still meant something. While Summerisle, in our minds, is a very clear sect, to them, it's merely a result of a world that seems uninviting. Outside their community exists danger. And they're right, because until Howie arrives, there's nothing to physically fear, except the one thing based purely on faith. A god with the true ultimate power and authority, who we never see. And not knowing what's really out there is the real horror of The Wicker Man. Hey folks, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on The Wicker Man in the comments below. And as you can tell, Ari Aster's Midsummer just released this week, so this video was a kind of a good companion piece to go along with it, given it was a pretty big influence on that film. So if you've seen Midsummer, let me know your thoughts on that as well in the comments below, but keep it spoiler free because many people haven't seen it. As you can tell, I'm still moving into my office, so things are a bit slow at the minute, but hopefully we'll get right back on track going into September time. So let me know what you want me to cover next, and if you enjoyed this video and you want to support the channel for just a few dollars a month over on Patreon, you'll get early access, you'll vote on future videos, you can get your name in the credits and get access to an exclusive Discord chat where tell me everything you've been watching, playing, reading, and talk to our awesome little community over there. With your support, that's what helps keep the lights on and keeps this show going, so thank you so much for that support as well. And until next time, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, stay safe, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.